Hi, this is Morgan Walton, and this is my Module 12 case study for school law. So to summarize the case, we have a copyright violation. These concerns are in a small rural school that's surrounding the computer software that was purchased for the classroom teachers. Who is involved? Mr. Keith Sample, he is the principal. This is his third year within the school. Mrs. Lynn, the librarian and media specialist. Mrs. Williams, she's a teacher. Mrs. Brandon, a teacher. And Mrs. Evans, the PTA president. Where did it occur? At St. Regis School, which is a small rural school with student population of 460 K through 8. The high school is in a city about 30 miles away. And what exactly happened? The school fundraiser money was used to purchase computer software for each grade level, in addition to computers for a computer lab to be used school-wide. Mrs. Lynn had made multiple copies of certain software for the teachers to use in their classroom on a computer as well. This violated the copyright laws. Mr. Keith Sample is not aware of it at this point. Mrs. Lynn made the copies after she was approached by some other teachers who thought it would be a good idea. Mrs. Williams is a veteran teacher and she was very excited about it. Mrs. Brandon, however, only has 3 years experience and she's new to this school, but she was very concerned about the situation. And Mrs. Evans, the PTA president, was in favor of it and actually helped to make the copies. Legal and ethical issues. There's definite legal and ethical issues. Legal issues, we have copyright violations for multiple copies of the software that was made by Mrs. Lynn. And we have ethical issues. Mrs. Lynn knowingly violated the copyright laws and continued to do so without remorse. In the beginning, I'm not sure if she knew that she was violating laws. When she was first approached, it seemed like she was just pleased to help out the teachers. It's not for sure if she knew that she was violating the laws. However, when she was approached and told about it by Mrs. Brandon, she still thought it was a great idea and didn't see any issue with it. Mrs. Lynn has knowingly violated copyright laws and argues her justification when confronted about the issue. She argued her justification with Mrs. Brandon and also with Mr. Sample when he approached her. So let's synthesize the facts. The people, we have Mr. Sample. These are the people who are most involved in this situation. Mr. Sample, Mrs. Lynn, and Mrs. Brandon, as she is the concerned teacher who went to Mr. Sample and actually informed him of the situation. It's happening at St. Regis School, small rural school, 25 miles from the nearest large city, and a K-8 population of 460 students. The program, we have a computer lab that was purchased with the fundraising money. It has 20 computers and it's used school-wide. The software computer purchased per grade level for instruction and extension was placed on these computer lab computers, and then the copies were made for a computer within the classrooms. Review and prioritize the facts. Is it damaging to the stakeholders, and do all the stakeholders actually know what happened? The superintendent and the school board are not aware, but they definitely should be made aware of the issue. The principal was only recently made aware when Mrs. Brandon confronted him and told him about the issue. It is definitely damaging. It's a legal case, and it definitely could arise if the publisher decides to take action if they discover that the copies were made. What more can I learn? What's the licensing user agreement for the software? We're unaware of this. We were not told about it in the case study. And what have the teachers been taught about copyright? Did they know about the copyright laws prior to this? They should, but being in a small rural school, it's very likely that they were unaware or just simply forgot about the laws. And do I know enough to make a decision? I definitely believe that I know enough to make a decision, regardless of what the exact user licensing agreement states for the software that was copied. I know enough to make an informed decision about the violations that have been made thus far. So here are our options. We have option 1, which is do nothing. Let it happen, allow the copies to be made and to be used within the classroom, and just hope that the publisher doesn't find out. Option 2, pay for the copied software. No matter how many copies she made, paying for that software would be a way to make it right. and get out of that. Option 3, discard the copies that were made and prevent further copies from being made. And option 4, fire Mrs. Lynn and rid the school of all copies that were made. All 4 of these options, no matter what's taken, will include training the staff, except for number 1, as number 1 is do nothing. So let's evaluate these options. Option number 1, do nothing. The pros, it provides software to all the computers. The kids would have more resources within their classroom and the computer lab. It avoids any issues with the PTA, as they were supportive in this movement and with Mrs. Lynn. The cons, a lawsuit definitely could arise, especially if the principal knowingly let it happen. And he's allowing illegal activity. This is illegal. It is against the law. And if he does nothing, then he's allowing it to happen. Mrs. Brandon would still be concerned. She was very concerned at the beginning, and I believe that she would still have those concerns, especially if nothing happened. Option 2, pay for it. There wouldn't be a lawsuit, as you'd be making it right by paying for the software, and the students would have more access to the software because it would still be allowed on their computers. The cons, it could be very expensive. We don't know this, as we don't know the cost of the software. It could be pretty cheap, but it could be very expensive. Option number 3, discard the copies. No further violations would be made, and it rids the school of the copied issue. The cons, a lawsuit still could arise, as the copies were still made, and then the students would have limited access, as they would still only be able to use the computers that are in the computer lab. Option number 4, fire Mrs. Lynn. Let's look at the pros and cons. The pros, action would be taken. All of the staff and stakeholders would know that this behavior would not be tolerated. The cons, it could cause further conflict with Mrs. Lynn on a lack of training. If she stated that she didn't know anything about the copyright law, she was never trained on it, that the school was negligent in allowing their staff to be unaware, that could cause further issues. And I also think that that option is a little extreme, as we don't know if she knew that she was violating it in the beginning, although we do know that she understood that she was violating it by the end. So what's our best choice? I believe that option number 3 is the best. We'll discard all of the copies made, and if it's already been downloaded onto the computers, we will get rid of it off of the computers, and then we'll provide training for all of the staff that's on copyright. Implementation. So I picked this option because I think it best suits the students, as they will understand what is right. If they're aware of the situation, they'll understand what is right, and that if a law was broken, that it's still unacceptable. While it would limit the students' use of the software and possible curriculum, then maybe further down the road we purchase more, but we have to follow the laws. And I believe that if we paid for the software and continued to use those copied CDs, that it could be very expensive, and that's why I didn't choose that option. I also think that discarding it would be the best way to get rid of the issue and save the district some money by not paying for it and hopefully not having legal fees. And then we'll also train the staff and make sure that our staff understands that this is unacceptable. So what are we going to do? First, we'll inform all additional stakeholders. That includes the superintendent, the Board of Education, and let the PTA know that we are getting rid of this and the reasoning why. And then we'll address Mrs. Lynn and Mrs. Brandon. I'll let Mrs. Lynn know that it's unacceptable and that we will be getting rid of all of the copies that were made, and she will not be allowed to make any further copies of anything unless given permission by the principal. I would make sure that I would make sure to put this in her file so that I am covered if a further issue does arise. I would also let Mrs. Brandon know that we are taking care of the issue and that I appreciate her concern and bringing it to my attention. Then I will enforce the removal of the software. I will personally make sure that all of the copied CDs and the software that's downloaded on those computers is removed. I would like to make sure that that happens, so I would prefer to do that myself or with others as well. And then finally, we'll train all staff on copyright laws. Anyone who could possibly be involved with copyright issues needs to be in that training. And I think it definitely should happen yearly, just as a refresher and a reminder, because sometimes teachers can be very resourceful and not necessarily understand that they're breaking laws. What could happen? We could run into further issues if the publisher finds out. That could cause some legal issues. And then our higher authority could change the plan. Once we let the superintendent and the Board of Education know, they may have a different plan, and it may change completely. So who needs to know about this? The superintendent, the Board of Education, the PTA, and then all staff needs to be aware, just so that if there are questions, they can point them to the principal. And then they also need to be aware why they are receiving the training that they're going to be receiving. What if this doesn't work? We'll consider the other options. The other 3 options, 2 of them I think are terrible, doing nothing and firing Mrs. Lynn. Paying for the software could be another option. Again, it kind of depends on the cost of the software. And then further discussion with the superintendent and the Board of Education could bring further assistance. They may have other ideas. They may completely change the plan anyways. So I think those would be great options to consider if this plan does not work.